room. The reading room. The reading room. The reading room.
This is episode 11, Moonraker.
James Bond is back for another mission, and this time he's blasting off into space. A spaceship is being transported and is mysteriously hijacked, so Bond must work quickly to find out who's behind it all. He starts with the creators of the rocket, Drax Industries, and the man behind the organisation, Hugo Drax. And along the way, he ends up meeting Dr. Holly Goodhead and encounters the metal-toothed Jaws once again. So, Jay, we rewatched this for the first time in many, many years. What did you remember, though, before you rewatched it?
Yeah, Andy, there was a few things I remembered about this one. I remembered that Jaws fell in love and he became a goodie. I also remember the bit where he's dressed as a clown. I think that's very memorable as well. And that's something that kind of stuck in my head as having watched it as a kid, but also obviously, as a young adult, and then watching it, rewatching it again with the missus. I remember that bit. The space battle, I think, is quite hard to forget as well, because it is very much sci-fi. And also I remembered the baddie with this. And I think I actually remembered as in his name, but also what he looked like. He has quite a distinct look as a Bond villain. What about you?
So a similar list for me, really. I remember Jaws being back. Obviously, we saw Jaws in the previous Bond film. And I remember that he got the girl in the end. So a nice love story for Jaws. I remember the fight scene on the cable cars. And I remember the space battle with the lasers. Another thing I remember was in Drax's compound, I guess you'd call it, or his base, was the centrifuge machine, where Bond wants to test it out, and he goes for a bit of a bumpy ride, shall we say. I certainly remember that scene. So, you touched on it earlier, one of the main villains being Hugo Drax. We have Jaws reappearing, starts the film as a villain, so he's on the list. And also we have Chang as one of the villains in this film. We have 4 different Bond girls. Dr. Holly Goodhead, that's a name I'm going to trip over throughout the episode, no doubt. Corinne Dufour, Manuela, and we have someone simply listed as private jet hostess.
Yeah, the distinction of the private jet hostess and the cabin girl, wasn't it, Andy, as well? In the previous movie, we've had a Bond girl. So yeah, the next film we're kind of keeping in track is the theme song, and this one is sung by Shirley Bassey, and it goes by Moonraker. And then with the opening credits, obviously we're ranking these later, but I like this, Andy. With the opening credits, we get to see Roger Moore again. So, he's appearing in the opening credits again. I did like that. We've got the usual naked models, the silhouettes of the ladies as well. We've also got the ladies kind of flying through the sky. They're kind of doing like an air shuttle kind of pose as they're kind of being filmed in the intro. We've also got a very close up of a model as well in this, and then we've got the opening credits obviously have the themes with the Bond films, and in this one we've got like lots of shots of Earth and space as well, so it's kind of continuing that theme. Next one we're keeping track is the body count, and James Bond kills only, so a respectable 12. Andy, as I was getting ready to go live, my daughter walked past and she saw that and she said, "Why does it say only? 12 is a lot of deaths." And I had to explain it. Oh, we're actually only counting James Bond kills. 12, there's a lot more deaths. James Bond only kills 12 in this. If you think 12 is a lot, wow, wait until you get older and you watch him.
Well, wise words from such a young girl. Only 12 deaths. Let's talk gadgets, shall we? This film is laden with gadgets. So I'm going to try and rattle these off as quickly as possible. This will probably take up half the podcast, there's so many. So we've got the wrist-mounted dart gun. We've got a safe-cracking device. We've got a spy camera. We've got a gondola that's also a hovercraft. We've got a wristwatch that contains a detonator, explosive charge, and fuse. And we also have a bunch of stuff that Q's demonstrating. So exploding bolas, Mexican machine gun, laser gun, and we have some of those in the space battle as well. So absolutely jam-packed full of gadgets, this one. Bond gives his customary introduction of James Bond, at the 17-minute, 22-second mark, so it takes his time. There's a respectable amount of time before he introduced himself. He's back on the martinis. We have one, and we get the reappearance of hats as well. So we've got a gondola hat throw and wearing. So it's a bit of a slight deviation from the usual hat wearing and throwing, but we have a callback to it on the gondola. So we've talked about what we remembered beforehand, but having watched it back, what was your favourite scene of the movie?
Yeah, my favourite scene is one I didn't remember. I didn't mention this earlier because I didn't remember it, but you obviously remembered this one. Was the cable car scene. Even though not much really happens in terms of action, obviously you have the fight, with Jaws, but I did quite like that with the they get stuck and then Jaws jumps over. They have a fight on top of the cable car, and then it starts coming down, and Jaws is kind of like chasing as well, and then it crashes at the bottom. And even though it's not action packed, I quite enjoyed that one, because I think some of the scenes that we pick out, in the previous movies are like a car chase, a boat chase. There's lots of action packed into those kind of favorite scenes. But I did quite like the cable car scene. What about you, Andy?
So for me, it was quite an early scene in the film. It was the fight in midair over the parachute. So Jaws pushes Bond out of the plane and he doesn't have a parachute on, but before him, someone else has gone out with a parachute. So Bond dives down and is fighting over a parachute in midair, and it's quite cool. Some of the stunt work that must have gone into it, but it's very memorable in terms of a fight scene location, because I don't recall any fight scenes in midair before or since. So that was quite unique in that regard. So one important question: how many times did you reach for your phone while you're watching this?
Surprisingly, Andy, I didn't reach for my phone once, so 0. There's obviously been times when I have reached for my phone in previous films, but Andy, I think I've been quite consistent. I've kept my surfing to a minimum, haven't I, in terms of these movies?
Very disciplined.
I have been very disciplined, yes. But yeah, we're going to talk about ratings later on, well, in a minute or two, but yeah, I didn't. There was no football on that night, so I was very well behaved, and I was making copious notes and making sure my wife didn't fall asleep. So yes. How about you?
So I was not so disciplined with this film. My rating in a moment will explain a lot of this, but it must have been 5 or 6 times I reached for it. Let's go on to ratings, and you'll understand why I ended up just getting so distracted and not caring about the film. So let's start with your rating. What did you give it out of 10?
I gave it a 5 out of 10. I did, and I don't know if I was being generous or not. Like I think I've said before, I can't remember we discussed this off air or not, but in terms of how I rank it, where I kind of look at the top film and then think, like, is it better or lower than that film when we rewatched it? And then I was basically moving down the list, and obviously we're talking about rankings later on, so I won't, people don't remember where what my rankings were. Where does 5 out of 10 sit? Yeah, it just wasn't that good. But I didn't want to give it any lower than 5 because, like, I can't remember a lot of the Bond films, because it's been so many years. So I didn't want to leave myself with too much of a gap at the bottom if any films came in lower than that. So that's why I've gone with the middle.
So you've gone conservative just in case there's some absolute dreck to follow.
I have, but I'm always very generous in my scoring. So it's consistent. And I think at the end of the pod, at the end of season 1, when we finish doing the James Bond ones, I think I'm going to have quite a few films grouped around the 5, 6, 7 mark, whereas I think from memory, you're probably going to have them more evenly distributed across the range. Whereas I think I've got, I can't think of the chart, what you call it, but mine's definitely going to be like very, mine's going to look like me, very heavy around the middle. That's what I'm going to say.
It's going to be like a bell curve, as I believe the chart you're looking for.
Called? Yes.
Bell curve, yeah.
But yeah, whereas I think yours will be probably more consistently distributed. So you've obviously alluded to that you're not happy with your phone surfing. You're 5 and 6 out of surfing with the phone. So how much did you give it out of 10? This one?
So I went into this with an open mind. I had a feeling from memory that it wasn't great, but I went in with an open mind, wanting to enjoy it, and I hated it. And I think I've been very generous by giving it 3 out of 10. We could have another hour on this podcast to be just telling you the reason why I dislike this film, but there was everything felt wrong about it. It just really didn't do it for me. A swing and a miss, as they might say in baseball.
So, Andy, when you were surfing your phone 5 or 6 times, was it non-Bond related, or were you Googling that, why is this film so bad?
Not always non-Bond related. Some things I was just like looking up bits of the film that I either didn't understand, or maybe I thought I'd missed something, or about some of the characters, but it was mainly down to boredom rather than curiosity. This film didn't grab me at all.
So, Andy, you've not given yourself much room for a film to be worse than this. Obviously, you could give a film a 0. Or
I could go as low can go. If I want to go negative numbers, I'll do it. But I can go high and go to the moon. Not literally to the moon like Bond did in this film, but I call it like I see it, and I did not like the look of this one. So 3. He should be can count himself lucky that I've given this film 3 out of 10. And he's not the only one to blame for that score, but he takes the brunt of it because he's the title character. Shame on you, Roger Moore. Shame. But never mind what we think. We've given our ratings. What did your wife think of the film?
Yeah, so I would say she probably agreed with you. So she said it was tough to watch. Again, she was falling asleep a lot. And, I've said that a few times, haven't I, in terms of, she's really flagging, but she's sticking in there in terms of the franchise. I've kind of, said to her, if you want to stop watching them, you can't. But no, she's really flagging. I've said to you before in previous episodes, she's just kind of hanging in there for the Brosnan films and the Craig films. But she did say something which I actually agree with completely, was the first 2/3 of the film were okay. I think, and she said this as well, and I didn't say this before she said it. The first 2/3 was fine. It was okay. But then that last third was just ridiculous. And that's what I thought, the first bit wasn't too bad in terms of comparing it to previous films. It's just that whole shift at the end, the last third, it just wasn't good. And also, she doesn't like sci-fi films at all, and she won't watch stuff like Star Wars, Star Trek. When we have like a movie night, it's like, what shall we watch? And she'll like go, no superheroes, no sci-fi films. And then, just limits in terms of what we can watch. But, she said this just felt like it moved from a spy genre film to a sci-fi film. And I don't know if you recall, Andy, at the beginning of, when we started rewatching these as part of the pod, she made a couple of comments about that the first few films felt like spy films, and then it kind of transitioned to kind of like action films. And then there was, I think, the 1 or 2 films where it kind of felt more traditional spy movie again. And then now it's kind of gone completely a different route down to the sci-fi route. So yeah, that's what the missus thought.
That's interesting.
Did you manage to get your missus to watch this magnificent film? I think if you got her to rewatch it, I think she might have just tapped out then, Andy, and not watched anymore.
I think if I was going to choose one film for her not to watch from the franchise so far, it would be this one. So I don't blame her for not partaking so far. But it's interesting points that your missus makes. And I would probably agree with it. The first 2/3, I wouldn't go as far as say they were okay, but they certainly weren't offensive. Whereas the last part of the film, just went from ridiculous to really ridiculous. So work to be done for the next film to improve that rating, that's for sure. Let's get a few final facts before we get into the nitty gritty. So the runtime was 2 hours 6 minutes, quite consistent with what we've seen for a lot of the Bond films so far. They tend to come in at around that just over 2 hour mark. Released in 1979, and this was the third and final Bond film directed by Lewis Gilbert, who you will recall also did You Only Live Twice and The Spy Who Loved Me.
Yeah, Andy, thank you for that. So before this is kind of not off topic, but this is off script. Lewis Gilbert, third and last film, You Only Live Twice, and The Spy Who Loved Me, and then this one, this classic. Bit of a mixed bag there, isn't it, really?
Yeah, it's hard to say that one was really like the other. Like, you wouldn't necessarily say it had his stylings on it. I mean, obviously one's a Connery and two of them are Moore films, so you're going to get some natural differences in how the part is played. But yeah, the overall feel of the films was very different between all three of them. So that is quite interesting, yeah.
So Andy, and this is, off script, so I'm just throwing it out there. I've just had a look at your ranking, so, I'm not going to say where you put Moonraker, but so you gave You Only Live Twice 6 out of 10, The Spy Who Loved Me 7 out of 10, and then Moonraker you gave 3 out of 10. So very mixed bag in terms of your ratings, and in terms of mine, I've done 7, 6, 5. So it's it's a sliding scale, but obviously with the films coming out in different order. So mine went 6, 7, 5, and then yours went 6, 7, 3. So same order, just the drop off was more significant with Moonraker.
I was clearly in a much more foul mood when I watched this than you were.
Okay, so that's the facts now. So before we kind of dip into the film, kind of not scene by scene, but as we watch along, some general points. So I talk about the money, for these movies. So let's talk about the budget. So this Moonraker has the highest budget to date. They put in $31 million for this, and you've only given it 3 out of 10. So that's not money well spent there.
More than $10 million per ranking point. It's not a good investment.
It's not, no. And this, Moonraker is more than the previous highest budget, which is The Spy Who Loved Me at 14. So they more than doubled the budget for Moonraker. So they went all out in terms of the sci-fi genre here. The producers really ramped it up. So what we said this before, there was a bit of a consistency with the budget, wasn't there? There wasn't much, they kept it consistent in terms of the budget. And then, they've gone with 14 million, and then they've really ramped it up with 31 million. And obviously, we mentioned before, the Bond franchise has been a box office success so far. So they've kind of really thrown it in there. And I don't know, in terms of what was happening, in 1979, was things a lot more expensive, or they're just like, because it was sci-fi, they had to spend loads more money on various bits and bobs. And you've obviously mentioned there's loads more gadgets in the film as well. So I wonder that's where some of the budget went. But in terms of box office stats, Andy, so at that time, this had the highest box office return so far in the franchise, with an impressive $210 million for the worldwide performance. And that's an increase of 25 million compared to The Spy Who Loved Me. That's not a bad return, is it, on the old 31 million?
That's pretty good. I guess that is one of those examples of you get what you pay for. And they've cracked the 200 million mark for the first time. So you gotta spend money to make money, I believe is the old saying, or you've got to speculate to accumulate, whichever one of those fits the narrative. But yeah, highly impressive performance.
Definitely. And also the moon, you've listed this before in terms of all the gadgets. Moonraker was actually criticized for the excessive number of gadgets. So this actually led to the producers reducing the number of gadgets in the next film, For Your Eyes Only, which obviously you can listen to next week's episode, and we'll be covering that film.
Yeah, we'll see just how many gadgets there are next time out. Some other news and notes. So we've got various locations for filming, including England, the United States, France, Italy, and Brazil, and of course outer space. Wink, wink. Jaws is back for the second and final time, and also making his final appearance is Bernard Lee as M. So at the time of filming, the actor was in quite ill health, and he was scheduled to appear in the next Bond film, but sadly he died during pre-production. So this is the last appearance of Bernard Lee as M. Lois Chiles was first approached for the role of Anya Amasova in The Spy Who Loved Me, but she turned down the role because she'd planned to leave acting altogether at the time. She then found herself on an airplane with Lewis Gilbert, the director, during her retirement stint, and he must have sweet-talked her because she ended up in the film after all.
Maybe that's where most of the budget went, Andy, on her salary to entice her into the Moonraker.
I could be enticed into Moonraker for $17 million, since that was the increase in budget.
And yeah, obviously a bit sad about Bernard Lee. We raise our martinis to him that this is his last appearance. So moving on, Fleming named Hugo Drax after his friend Sir Reginald Drax, who was an admiral in the Royal Navy. So a nice little nod there. Also, Hugo Drax is played by French actor Michael Lonsdale. So Lonsdale only features in one Bond movie, but has featured in films with James Bond actors Sean Connery and Daniel Craig, as well as Jonathan Pryce, who plays Elliot Carver in Tomorrow Never Dies, and Sean Bean in GoldenEye. So I think that's a, when we mentioned before about the 6 degrees? Is it 6 degrees, Andy?
6 degrees of separation, yep.
Yeah, so, that linkage there between, I like that little nod there, where he's appeared with films, with Sean Connery and Daniel Craig, and obviously Roger Moore, and then, Sean Bean and Jonathan Pryce. I thought that was a nice bit of research there, Andy. Well done to the research person there.
Whoever he is, he's not getting paid enough. That's for sure. Maybe we need to increase the budget for our research team.
So Dolly, also Andy, Dolly didn't appear in the early versions of the script or the novel. So the inclusion of Dolly wasn't the screenwriter's idea. So the screenwriter is Christopher Wood, but was created by the producers and Richard Kiel. Is that how you pronounce it? Richard Kiel?
Yeah, indeed.
Who obviously plays Jaws. So, Richard obviously wanted a bit of action. Maybe, when he appeared in the previous movie, he saw Roger Moore was getting all these Bond girls and he thought, I'm not missing out there. Where's my Jaws girl? And he obviously gets Dolly.
Indeed, he wanted himself a Dolly bird, as they would say. Our listeners over the age of about 55 will understand that reference. Everyone else will just think, what the hell is he talking about? But anyway, let's carry on. So this was the first Bond film with Michael G. Wilson acting as executive producer. He was previously an assistant to Cubby Broccoli on The Spy Who Loved Me, and he also worked in the legal department for Eon. He is the stepson to Cubby Broccoli and has been either an executive producer or a producer for every Bond film from this point. It's quite an interesting note there. And Chang, one of the villains we talked about earlier, was played by Japanese Aikido instructor Toshiro Suga. Suga was recommended for the role by Wilson, who was one of his pupils. So it just goes to show it's not what you know, it's who you know.
I was going to say exactly the same thing there. Nice one. Great minds think alike, Andy.
Yeah. We even finished each other's
sentences.
Well done.
Are you going to say sandwiches? So, moving on, Moonraker was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Visual Effects in 1979, but lost out to Alien. Oh, can you imagine all those laser fights in space and they didn't win the Best Visual Effects, Andy, for the Oscars? That's a shame.
I mean, that's what happens when you get out of your lane. Bond is not sci-fi. You've got to leave it to the experts.
Yes. Yeah.
There's a life lesson there, people.
Alien film as well. Is that James Cameron? No, Ridley Scott Alien, isn't it? James Cameron did Aliens. Yeah, Ridley Scott. So yeah, maybe we'll cover that film in future seasons, who knows? So moving on to goofs and continuity errors. This was my favorite scene. We got the cable car, but there's actually a bit of a continuity error here. So we see Dr. Goodhead's shoes change from high heels to flat soles, and they also change colour, Andy, in this bit. So it doesn't ruin my favourite scene, but it was noticeable. We also see when, and Andy, this is your favourite scene. So we had my favourite scene and now your favourite scene. So when Jaws is chasing Bond during the parachute scene at the start, the distant shots show him with clear wind goggles, but the close-up shots show tinted, darker goggles. So both our favourite scenes have been ruined by these continuity errors. Or Indeed. Maybe not, because they are the best scenes. But.
Well, I mean, that tells you all you need to know, really, that the least errored scenes are the ones we liked the most. Another one that I believe your good lady picked up was Corinne Dufour, Drax's assistant. She's being chased by the dogs. She starts off with high heels and no socks, but then she's wearing trainers and dark socks where she's being chased through the woods. So a lot of outfit changes mid-scene here. People are clearly not happy with the way they look during dangerous scenarios.
Yeah, I didn't pick that up. And when she pointed it out, I did wind it back. And yeah, she was correct. Not, I wasn't, well, I suppose I was doubting her, but she did pick it up. And you when rewatching it, I did notice that, but yeah.
Shall we get into the film proper? So the opening scene, this is obviously before we get to the title sequence of music. We see a space shuttle being stolen. It's being transported on top of the airliner, and it gets stolen, and it blasts right off the plane. I thought that was quite a cool visual, actually, the way it just kind of shoots off, and then the plane is destroyed in the backdraft, I guess you would call it, of the shuttle. We then cut to MI6, and M is asking Moneypenny whether 007 is back. She states, "He's on his last leg, sir," and just at that moment, the camera cuts to Bond touching up a stewardess. Dirty, dirty boy. But a nice little innuendo there from Moneypenny, even if she didn't necessarily realise it at the time. And I don't know if you agree with this point. I don't know if this is me being too harsh, but Moneypenny's starting to look really old. And not only that, Bond is looking really old as well.
I agree. And I can't remember if it was this film or the film before when the wife was adamant that the actress that played Miss Moneypenny had changed. And I was going, no, it's definitely the same. And she was like on Google checking it. And she said, oh, yeah, she's like looking a lot older. And I can't remember if it was this one or, the previous one. I just can't remember. But yeah, I totally agree. And both of them are getting, but when you think about it, it's been going on for a few years now. Moneypenny's been in there, hasn't she?
Well, yeah, I mean, we're up to 1979 in terms of the release of this, compared with 62 for Dr. No. So 17 years of Bond at this point. So that's 17 years of Moneypenny, pretty much.
17 years of Bond probably ages Moneypenny as well. So we see Bond is flying Apollo Airways. And Andy, I like to kind of bring in family members into this podcast. So a little tidbit, I had a cat called Apollo. That irrelevant, there's nothing else about it. Apollo didn't appear in this film, but he's no longer with us, sadly. But yeah, so I had a cat called Apollo.
Named after the airways in this film?
No, it was...
Just coincidence.
Yes, it was named after a actor from a TV show, yes. But not from James Bond or Apollo Creed that you might be thinking about in terms of Rocky. So Apollo Airways was a real Californian passenger and cargo charter that operated between 1975 and 82. And obviously you mentioned this film was in 79 there, so it does fit. But Apollo Airways actually changed its name and then ceased operations in late 1985. So a bit of history there, Andy, in terms of Apollo Airways. We get to see Jaws again. So, as we both said, Jaws is in here again, and we remembered him. So we get Jaws, back again. Straight away, he's back. So there's no hanging about, no teasing. He's straight away back. And, we see that he pushes Bond out of the aeroplane without a parachute. So that's not very nice, is it? And then we get this nice little mid-fight, battle between Bond and the pilot over this parachute. And obviously, you mentioned this was your favourite scene, Andy.
Yeah, this was a nice scene, and very, very early on in the film, as I seem to remember it was, before the film even starts.
Yeah, so he peaked, basically. That was your favourite scene, and then that's it, all downhill now.
Exactly.
So, did you have any thoughts? Was there any other thoughts about that scene?
Well, the obvious one was, it's clearly a stuntman that's playing Jaws, and we've seen stuntmen appear in other films, and there's been a bit of a blatant obviousness that it's not the same person. Particularly in the early ones where they were showing the stuntman's face and it's not Connery or it's not Roger Moore. But I guess in this case, how many 7-foot-tall stuntmen are there in the world? It's not really a lot you can do about that unless you get Richard Kiel doing it himself.
True, yes. And I think he probably would have made the budget even more if they paid him to do it himself. But yeah, no, I agree, Andy. I've got a question though for you, Andy. So we obviously then see Jaws land without a functioning parachute and he lands on the circus tent. I thought that would have killed him in real life. And then is that what the audience are expecting? That Jaws is dead at that point and, that's it now. We don't see him anymore.
You would think, wouldn't you? I mean, a fall from that height, which is basically what it was because there was no functioning parachute. So it was a fall from many, many thousands of feet landing on a circus tent, which, for all intents and purposes is the same material as a trampoline, but it's going to be poles in the ground, so it's not going to have much give. I just don't understand any logical universe where anyone survives that fall.
No, and interestingly, Andy, or it might not be interesting, but I'm just going to mention it. On Reddit the other night, I watched a parachute jump where the person jumping out the plane, not halfway down, but as they were, free flowing down, they were doing a selfie of themselves and they dropped their phone. And then the phone went all the way down and landed in a farm. And then you saw the face of a pig come up and sniff it. So the phone managed to land and, survive. And then they managed to upload the video. So that's quite impressive. I'm not saying Jaws is like a phone, and this is in 1979, but I was really surprised that the phone survived as well. And Jaws obviously survives.
If those teeth are made of the same material as the phone and he landed teeth first, then maybe there's an out there, but otherwise I'm not convinced.
Yes. Yeah, me too. I was, really surprised. So Andy, before we kind of go into, the opening title sequence, we get the gun barrel. And, I mentioned in the previous film that they changed the background tints with the brown and with the Moore film. So we usually have the usual white. And now in Moonraker, we've got buff, which, to be honest, I Googled because I thought they were just talking about me, buff, but apparently it's light brownish yellow. So
yeah, could still be talking about you. We'll cut that. Maybe.
But yes, that's the gun barrel sequence.
It's the gun barrel sequence sponsored by Dulux Paint Shots, of course. From there, we get the opening title sequence and music. Shirley Bassey is back for the third and final time to perform the theme song. Frank Sinatra was actually considered, and Johnny Mathis was subsequently offered the opportunity, but he declined it because he wasn't happy with the song. Kate Bush also declined as she was about to tour as well, so it ended up going to Shirley Bassey. John Barry has returned to the franchise at this point, and he offered the song to her just weeks before the release date. So Shirley Bassey made the recordings at very short notice, and she never really regarded the song as her own, as she'd not really had the chance to perform it or promote it first, and subsequently has very, very seldom performed the song live, whereas her other two Bond themes, which were Goldfinger and Diamonds Are Forever, she's performed live on many, many occasions. So she clearly had her favourites of the songs, and this one was very low down on her list.
And obviously stay tuned in and you can see where Moonraker appears on our list later on as well, when we rank the theme songs. So the film uses two versions of the theme song. So we've got the ballad version, which is heard over the main title sequence. And then we have this, I don't want to say weird, but a very different disco version during the end. And I think we mentioned in the previous episode, Andy, this is where we got that transition now, where we started having these different versions from, the theme song at the beginning and at the end. So, we see that again. The song didn't perform very well in the charts, and this is probably likely to do with the lack of promotion and the lateness with the recording. So the song was recorded in Paris, and unlike all of Barry's previous Bond songs, which were recorded in London. So I wondered whether this was due to the previous, when we previously mentioned that he had some tax problems. I'm guessing it was. But yeah, so he usually records them all in London in the films that he's done. But yeah, he recorded it in Paris this time around.
Interesting, yeah. Saving a bit of that budget money as well, which is very interesting considering the budget is getting to be out of control nowadays.
Yes, I don't want to get done for slander, but I wonder if a certain individual, with their tax problems is siphoning some of that budget off.
That's another podcast for another time, I think. Maybe look out for our conspiracy theories edition.
So Moonraker uses, for the first time since Diamonds Are Forever, a piece of music called 007. So this is a secondary Bond theme composed by Barry, which was introduced in From Russia with Love. So obviously, it's, From Russia with Love, episode 2, film 2, and we see it again. Obviously, Diamonds Are Forever as well. So I like that little tidbit.
Yeah, it's like a John Barry signature almost. So that's a nice little nugget of information. We move on from the title sequence over back to MI6. Bond is late to the meeting because of the aforementioned incident with the plane and the parachute. And there's a nice little bit of banter between Bond and Moneypenny, as we've seen in many of the films. I felt that this was fun, but not flirty, if that makes sense. Normally there's some sort of innuendo or a little bit of a tease between the two that, something more than just friendship is occurring, but this was not the case at all. It was very friendly rather than flirty, which is a bit strange. And Bond tells Moneypenny all about falling out of the airplane without a parachute, and Moneypenny just kind of laughs at him, doesn't believe him, and tells him to go into his meeting.
Yeah, she kept it very professional there, didn't she? No messing about. And yeah, it's a good comment, Andy, there.
Yeah, we get a scene where Q fits Bond with his new wrist dart gun, and Bond shoots the painting in M's office. M's clearly not happy and kind of goes, "Oh, thank you, 007," in a bit of a whingy voice. Q's having a bit of a moan about being careful because they include cyanide-coated darts that can kill within 30 seconds. Bond then proceeds to walk to the door, says, "Very novel, Q. Must get them in the stores for Christmas. Good day, gentlemen."
I like that little scene. Yeah, it was funny. I like the banter between Bond and M, and then Bond and Q. So yeah, I did like that. So we're going from MI6 to California now. So M tells Bond to investigate Drax, and Bond flies to California to see Drax at his mansion.
Yeah, I made a note here that this was very, very elaborate, as most Bond villains are with their base, but this was extravagant beyond extravagance. This was something else, I thought.
Yeah, and there's a comment in there as well, which I didn't write down, but didn't someone say that Drax got the bricks transported all the way from France or something?
He did, yeah. It was almost like a French-style mansion in the middle of California. So it's like he's brought a little bit of France to America.
Yeah, his own Lego set. So it must be good if you can afford to do that. So again, this is, wow, I'm guessing a little nod to Bond being British, or do you associate tea and cucumber with English? I'm not quite sure. So yeah, Drax offers Bond tea and cucumber sandwiches. We also see a little scene here where Drax has these two dogs, I think they're Rottweilers, but it's very clear that he's obviously showing the audience or Bond or both how disciplined the dogs are, because he tosses some meat down, but they don't eat it, they just stay there. And then Drax gives the instruction, and that's when he eats it. So I thought that was quite good. But then they speed it up again. So, they use that speeded up shot that we see a bit more frequent in the earlier Bond films, not so much nowadays as well. And I made a note here, Andy, and I don't know if this is the first time that they've used a speeded up bit in the more film. And I can't remember if we've discussed it or not in any of the previous podcasts, so apologies if we have. But I just don't feel like we need that shot. Why does it need to be sped up when the dogs are eating some meat? It just seems pointless.
Very random. I associate that kind of shot more with the Connery films, to be fair. So I'm not sure we've seen that in the Moore films so far, but it was an unwelcome return, I would say.
I agree. But Andy, before we carry on, we both have dogs. Would your dog behave like that when you drop a piece of meat?
Absolutely not. I think she wouldn't go at quite the speed that those dogs did, because obviously it's not really possible. But it would be very difficult to keep her still until she's told to eat. So yeah, it wouldn't happen. But then also, my dog wouldn't be anywhere near as intimidating as the dogs that Drax owns, because she's like a little teddy bear. One thing that struck me about this particular scene is the interaction between Bond and Drax, who, don't forget, is the main antagonist of this film. It's very polite, very cordial. Again, and I've said this in a number of films now, where there is this, not necessarily hatred, but they are enemies. They are on the opposite sides of the law, and they interact with each other as if they're best friends, and it's very, very strange to see.
It is very strange, and yeah, we've mentioned this before. It's a common theme, and we've said before countless times that if the villain just kills Bond straight away instead of doing this kind of, I don't know, slow dance, the film will obviously be shorter. And maybe, if the film ended here, Andy, you could have scored it higher than a 3 out of 10.
It'd have been a 4+ for sure. From there, Bond goes to meet Dr. Goodhead. Is very surprised to see that she's a woman, and he even makes comment of this. I mean, I would go as far as to say that he's very, very condescending and patronizing, like throughout their interaction. It's almost uncomfortable. I've put the note here, and if I maybe need to edit this out, but it's a bit strong. But he's a bit of a dick. There's no other way of saying it. He is a bit of a dick towards her, and it's not really necessary or warranted. But she does give a little bit back. She makes some comments about him losing the Moonraker space shuttle, so she can give as good as she gets, but a little bit unnecessary, I would say, from Bond here.
Yeah, it's definitely uncalled for. And considering, we've said before, the Moore version of Bond is very smooth and loving, and this bit he's obviously a bit of a chauvinist, isn't he, in terms of, that's what the wife comment has been for numerous times. But it just seemed a bit out of character, I would say, for a Roger Moore Bond, this bit. But so now we get to a bit that you remembered, Andy. So Bond is offered a chance to try this training equipment that, astronauts use to prepare for space. So we see Dr. Goodhead, strapping in. But she also mentions that most people pass out at 7 Gs. And then she also shows Bond this cutoff switch, which I think from memory, I think she says something like the chicken switch or something. And then we kind of see Chang then kind of walk into the control room as well. And then he starts, manipulating the machine and increases the speed. And then we see during the scene that it's passing 7 Gs and, Bond is still going. But then Bond is then trying to press the switch, but obviously it's not working because Chang's obviously, controlling the machine as well. But impressively, Andy, we get Bond gets all the way up to 13 Gs. And then he manages to use the wrist dart gun as well and shoots and disables the machine. So I thought that was pretty good. And then I thought it was a bit funny as well, where Bond kind of stumbles out. Dr. Goodhead's helping him out, and he has a little stumble at the machine, and he looks a bit shaken there as well. And he kind of then looks up to the control room and kind of sees Chang kind of just walking away, from the machine. So he's kind of disappointed as well, because I think we haven't mentioned it in the podcast notes, but just before that scene, I think Drax says something like, make sure some harm comes to Bond, doesn't he? He makes some kind of quip, doesn't he, like that?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what he says. Yeah, make sure some harm comes to him.
Andy, did you have a comment on there about Chang?
Yeah, so the note I made was that Chang's reaction was very strange. I said he looks like a sad puppy dog. He looks just really disappointed, boo-boo face, you might say. It's not the reaction of someone who's had an evil plot foiled. He's obviously tried to kill him or at least injure him in some severe way, and it's not quite worked out. And he just has this look on his face like a sad puppy dog, like he's been caught weeing on the cushions or something. It just didn't fit what was going on in the film at the time. It's very strange.
Yeah, that was funny because when I read your note there, Andy, when you sent it over, it did remind me of that scene. I thought that was quite funny actually. And you had a sad puppy dog. I think it was funny, that bit. We also get, so we see later on Bond beds Karine, and then he kind of just sneaks out and goes into Drax's office, but he gets caught by Karine as well. But then he breaks into the safe, and you can see him taking some photos of the plans as well. But then he uses this little camera, which has the insignia of 007 on the camera as well, which I don't know if you had any thoughts on that. I thought it was, why would you publish yourself, promote yourself as 007 on like your merch? It's like he's some kind of YouTuber and he's having all his merch put out there. Why would you have 007 on your spy camera?
Yeah, unless he's going around like door to door selling his swag. Like, he's a spy. You're not supposed to know who he is, and yet everything he has his insignia on. Doesn't make sense to me at all. That, but at least it's his camera.
That's what I was going to say. Maybe he did it himself. He wrote it so 008 doesn't take his camera, and it basically is just 00, and then he's wrote on the 7, so no one else takes it.
It's a very high budget way of like writing your name in your underpants. That's what it's the equivalent of. But one note about Corinne in this, and she's not the first Bond girl to be guilty of this, and probably won't be the last. She's very happy to just give up her information and her body, just smitten by Bond, and just tells him anything he wants to hear, gives him anything he wants to have. Very subservient, I guess, is the word I'm looking for. We move on to some pheasant shooting with Drax and his gang. And we see the dogs there again, and they're growling menacingly, or at least they sound like they are, because when the camera cuts to their face, they look very placid, not really making a lot of movement or visible noise, but the audio suggests that they are quite angry. So there's a bit of another continuity error there between what we're seeing and what we're hearing.
Maybe it's similar to the earlier Bond films where they were dubbed, Andy. So the whole the voice and the expressions isn't quite into sync like we've had in some earlier Bonds.
Yeah, where's Nikki Van Zyl when you need her? That's what I want to know.
So I'm just going to make an observation, Andy, and I've got a question for you and the audience. So Drax makes the same mistake that many have made before him. So instead of simply killing Bond, he sees Bond coming, and he kind of like makes a motion to one of his huntsmen to basically walk to this tree, climb up the tree, and then get his shotgun ready. And you can see the huntsman, is in the tree, he's adjusting his scope as well. He's getting ready for the big kill. By having a scope on there and the fact that he's adjusting the scope on there, this is going to imply then that there's a fair bit of distance between him and Bond. Okay. So then we see Drax tell Bond, oh, shoot a pheasant. And then, Bond, the pheasants are, flying up, and Bond shoots. And as the audience, you see Bond miss. But then you see the huntsman basically drop out of the tree. So Bond actually shoots the would-be assassin. Now, my question is, would the shotgun that Bond is using reach the shooter in the tree? Because the shooter, he didn't have a shotgun. Sorry, apologies, I mentioned shotgun earlier. He has a rifle with a scope. would the shotgun reach? Shotguns I thought was like short distance, and splatter, just thinking of all the times I've played online gamings with like COD and everything. How is Bond shooting this huntsman in the tree?
That is an interesting question. I would suggest the shotgun could go a reasonable distance because it can shoot the pheasants or clay pigeons or whatever equivalent there would be in this scenario it's pheasants. So, there's a fair distance, but not necessarily a massive amount. But you're right with your earlier point. The fact that the huntsman in the tree needs a rifle with a scope would suggest the distance is far greater than that. Otherwise, you just give him a shotgun as well. So, I think there's a definite mismatch there. But I don't know if the problem is that Bond has the shotgun and is too far away, or the huntsman has a rifle and is probably too close.
Yeah, that's a fair point, Andy. Yeah, thinking of the other way around. Yes, fair point.
Continuing with this scene, so Bond has the shotgun, which we just discussed, and then he kills the huntsman, and then he walks off. But on his way, he hands the gun back to Drax and continues walking with his back turned. But Bond knows that Drax is out to kill him at this point, so why would you just hand the gun back and then walk away with your back turned? That seems a very cavalier attitude to have with your own life.
I agree completely, because you could argue Bond still potentially is still investigating. He's took some photos, hasn't he, with his special spy camera. But you just wouldn't hand the gun back over, would you? In that instance, you'd be more obviously slowly walk away facing the villain, wouldn't you? You wouldn't just be like, oh, just turn around and walk off. But yeah, it's very weird, very weird. It's the whole thing, though, isn't it, with the James Bond franchise, isn't there? There's that play between the villains and Bond, that slow dance that I've mentioned before.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think this in part is why I've rated the film as low as I did. Is it kind of grew a bit tiresome, this interplay between the two. And this was just an example that took things a little bit too far and a little bit too out of the realms of realism. But final thing in this particular scene, so Corian is then chased by Drax's two dogs and eaten. And that's another one of Bond's conquests that has been killed. That list is growing all the time.
That list is growing, Andy. It is, definitely. So we are in Venice now. So we've gone from California to Venice, and Bond is chasing up the lead from the pictures that he saw from Drax's mansion. So he's gone to investigate the Fanini glass manufacturer, which is obviously he came across in the plans. And he comes across Dr. Goodhead, and he's having a museum tour. And, when I was watching this, Andy, I was kind of half expecting J.W. Pepper to make an appearance, but maybe Venice is too far, from, is it Texas, Louisiana? Is that right?
Louisiana, yeah.
Yeah.
He's from the deep, deep south.
Yeah, so I was half expecting J.W. Pepper to make an appearance there. And Bond is following Dr. Goodhead, and he makes a quip about her being more than just a beautiful woman as well, because she's taking in a bit of culture at the museum. Another unnecessary comment, because she is obviously a doctor as well. Yeah,
more rampant sexism by Bond. So we're now at a point where Bond is having a relaxing trip on the canals in a gondola, and he's attacked by some henchmen. And there's a pretty funny bit where there's a coffin on top of a boat, and there's a hitman hiding inside with a whole bunch of weapons. That was quite a nice touch. And then we have what is now customary James Bond boat chase.
Yeah, Andy, before I just kind of make another comment, in terms of the coffin bit, which I think was funny, and I think it was a good bit, don't you think it's a bit weird that the would-be assassin kills the whatever you call the person that controls a gondola? Sailor?
The gondolier?
the equivalent of a taxi driver. Don't you think for gondolas, gondolas, Don't you think it's a bit weird though that the would-be assassin kills him who's unarmed instead of going for the well-known spy British agent? Because the element of surprise is gone, isn't it? As soon as he throws the knife.
Yeah, it's again, it's another one of those unnecessary things just to elongate the chase. But yeah, maybe it was just like needing a bit of practice, so he would go for the easy target first, and he went after the gondoloso or whoever he is. Any listeners out there, if you want to tell us what the real name of someone who drives a gondola is, please feel free to contact us on the usual social media channels.
So we see Bond escapes now with his gondola, and then it turns into a hover gondola. So we've seen it become like a speedboat gondola for a bit, and then it goes to an inflatable one. So the bottom inflates, and then it zooms off from the henchman on the boat. Interestingly, Andy, the wife turned to me at that point and says whether this was an MI6 gondola. And then I just said, no, wife, they all come like that. Because it's quite obvious that it was an MI6 one, because you're not going to have all gondolas like that. Can you imagine? I don't really know places in Venice, so I can't quote places, but just seeing a load of gondolas on land hovering and stuff like that. So that did make me chuckle. She wasn't asleep then, so that's good. She was paying notice. So I love this bit, Andy, and I know you mentioned this earlier, but this is the first time that Roger Moore is wearing a hat in the Bond franchise, and we are treated to the hat throw as well. And when this happened, I cheered. I was like, yes. And I was quickly scribbling it down on my notes. So I'm glad, because obviously we've had a few movies where we've not had a hat or a throw. So I was very happy that we had this.
Yeah, it's good to have Old Faithful back. We've missed the hats, and now they're back. We'll see for how long. Once he's off his boat and he's on dry land, or what limited dry land there is in Venice, he oversees and overhears someone enter a code to get into a lab, and it's the music from Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I heard it, and I thought it was one of the things I actually checked my phone for. It's like, I know that music, so I had to check what that was, and I'm glad you wrote it in your notes. So I didn't really need to check after all. I could have just read your notes. Yes, so Spielberg gave Broccoli permission to use the music for the keypad sequence, and then years later the favour was returned, and the Bond theme was used by Spielberg in The Goonies. So that's a nice little you scratch my back, I scratch yours type deal.
Have you seen The Goonies?
I have.
I'm putting you on the spot.
Tremendous film. It's been a while since I've seen it, but it's a tremendous film.
Do you know which bit the Bond theme is in The Goonies?
No, I do not. I can't remember that bit at all. The lasting memory is, hey, you guys. Because that's everyone's memory of The Goonies.
I did Google this, and I can't remember what the character is. But the little boy that has all the gadgets. I don't know. That's not to James Bond. It's him where he kind of zip lines across, and then that's where the James Bond theme is.
Of course. I remember it now. You said it. Yeah. So Bond is in the lab now, and he's observing some scientists, and he sees them pour some type of chemical into some glass tubes. When the scientists leave, Bond enters, and there's a bottle balancing on the edge. And when the scientists return, they accidentally knock it over and smash the tube, and the chemical fumes kill the scientists within the room, but the rats seem fine, which is quite interesting. That's probably a premonition for what's going to happen when the world ends. The rats will be fine when we're all wiped out.
Yeah, I think it's a nod, isn't it? I think later on where Drax is talking about his plan. So then shortly afterwards, Bond is attacked by Chang, who is wearing full kendo protective armor. So again, we have the sped up fight scene with Chang. So, again, it's appearing. But otherwise, I think this is a pretty good fight, between Chang and Roger Moore. And it ends with Chang being thrown through the clock tower as well. And then the clock tower glass, and then he falls into a piano. at the bottom. This prompts Bond to play it again, Sam, which is actually a quote widely known to be incorrect and not used in Casablanca, as most people tend to believe, Andy.
Yeah, it's fascinating. We might do some bonus content on some missaid quotes, because there's a whole bunch of them that I read up on, and it's quite fascinating. But that I didn't actually realise was one of them. So thank you for that. We're treated to kind of millions and millions of dollars worth of precious artwork as part of the fight scene, and they're just placed in these flimsy cabinets that smash when either Bond or Chang just breathes on them, it seems. And it just seems very odd that such precious art would be on display in such poor cabinet structures. Just it's like they don't really care about the artwork at all.
The museum must have gone with the cheapest bid, Andy, with that.
The museum must have some kind of deal with IKEA, maybe. I like IKEA. We might want them as sponsors one day, so I'll cut that bit out. But Bond then goes on to see Dr. Goodhead in her room, find out she works for the CIA. This is after he's finished playing with a number of gadgets that are in the room. I noted here there's quite a lot of one-liners. It seemed like he would pick up a gadget, say something funny, and then go to another gadget, say something funny. It became a bit of a series here that was kind of gadget one-liner, gadget one-liner.
Yeah, I didn't like that. I thought that was a bit too. They were playing too much to the audience there, I thought, in that scene there. So we then see Bond speaking Italian when he goes back to the lab with M and Sir Frederick Grey. However, Drax has converted or removed the lab, and Sir Frederick Grey isn't a happy bunny. And he tells M to basically take Bond off the case. He's like embarrassed as well. And then M gives Bond 2 weeks leave, and Bond tells M he's going to Rio de Janeiro in Brazil because he's obviously still following up a lead. So I thought that was a nice. Obviously, I wonder how practical it is, because when Bond and Sir Grey go into the room with M, the camera pans to the roof, doesn't it? The ceiling, you can see all this artwork as well. And it's like, how is it possible that Drax has converted it from the lab to his office?
Yeah, that was quite the cover-up, I would say. And I just one question I have, and maybe it's rhetorical. Is Italian part of the Oriental languages that Bond studied at Cambridge?
You know, I nearly made a quiff about that as well. So Bond is now going to Brazil, and he's flying in an Air France Concorde. So a nice little Concordes were obviously around then. Yeah,
they were around, I think, late 60s to around, was it 2003, the last flight? Something along those lines. Someone will Google that and tell me I've got it wrong, but it was around for 30 odd years. And then there was one crash, and we've never seen them since. Yeah, quite sad end to the Concorde franchise. But when Bond arrives at his suite, we're introduced to Manuela, who's there preparing him a martini, shaken not stirred, of course. And Bond makes a remark about how he's got 5 hours to kill. But I did have a question about this particular scene. So when Bond is on his way to the hotel, we see that she's following him in a car behind. I think he's in a cab, isn't he? And she's driving behind him. He arrives at the hotel, she drives away. But then when he goes up to his room, she's in his room making him a martini. So how did she get there before he arrived when she was behind him as he arrived? That feels like a massive error there, unless we're supposed to believe something happened that delayed Bond between him arriving at the hotel and going to his room. Just seems a little bit out of place there, I would say.
Yeah, and I'm just trying to think whether anything did happen, but I can't recall anything happening. Maybe something happened off camera, Andy. Maybe I went shopping, because of how stylish he is. Maybe it was looking at some South American fashion shops or something. But no, that's a good
Yeah,
point.
but you'd want to leave your bags in your room first. You know,
True,
maybe
yeah.
maybe freshen up, things of that nature. Unless he just thought, no, you know what? I'm desperate to go to the shops. I'm going to take my bags with me.
You know what he probably did? Probably headed down to the beach straight away just to check out any topless sunbathers. I think that's what Bond would have probably done straight away.
Probably used his spy camera to get some extra photos as well.
So we now see Bond and Manuela go to investigate a lead, and they're passing through a carnival. So we see a large clown approach Manuela as well, and obviously I remembered this bit, and I think it's good because it's quite daunting, because the clown is slowly moving, but I don't know if you noticed it, Andy, because obviously I remembered the clown. So you know where they were passing through the carnival, you already could see the clown's head, can't you, above the crowd? And obviously, you know, I remember that being Jaws, and you probably remember that being Jaws. But then you start slowly, when she's looking down the street, you see Jaws the clown walking, and then obviously then slowly start coming down the alleyway as well. I thought that was quite daunting, and I like the build up, how it was slowly coming down as well. And then you obviously then find out it's Jaws, and then he's obviously about to do his trademark vampire bite, but then Bond jumps down onto Jaws to, like, you know, save the day. And then a bit later on, Bond and Dr. Goodhead meet again, and then this time she makes a quip about Bond being familiar, and so is the manner as well. So she gives as good as she gets.
She does indeed, and I think she needs to with Bond, particularly because he's on fine form in terms of his sexist persona. So she needs to have a bit of fight in her, and good for her. We now get to the memorable scene with the cable cars. So we've got Bond, Goodhead, and Jaws. Jaws bites through the metal cable, which causes, you know, problems with the cable car, and then he travels down. He's kind of on the opposite side, so the two cable cars traveling in opposite directions, and they're going to meet in the middle. So we've got Bond and Goodhead on one and Jaws on the other. And Jaws makes a leap from the top of one cable car to the other one to, you know, meet, quote unquote, Bond and Goodhead. But the jump itself, this was something that bothered me. I know you made a note about this as well when you watched it, but it bothered me not only because of the distance between the two cable cars, I think is too much for a man to jump, even someone of the size of Jaws with his long legs, but it was the motion that he took as well. Like, if you were to just look at the motion he took, he's not jumping very far at all, but all of a sudden he's flying through the air from cable car to cable car. So that really took me out of the moment.
I agree. And when you said that, it reminds me of a kind of like a kid jumping up from a road to a curb or vice versa. You know how young kids do that kind of jump? They kind of, like, you know, with both feet at the same time. But also, Andy, another thing that just kind of come to mind is Jaws bites through the cables to stop Bond and Goodhead's cable car moving and stuff. Why didn't he just bite through all the cables? So then the cable car just fell to its death. And then it's like, oh, I've done it. I might as well just get my paycheck now. You know, I've killed Bond, I'll get a little bonus. But no, he basically bites the cable, then travels up to meet Bond and Goodhead, like in the middle, to then jump across. He's just building in so much risk. And I know we said it in previous podcasts as well, when the like the henchmen or the villains kind of take unnecessary risk or even draw out things. But yeah, it was just a bit silly, even though this is my most favorite, you know, my favorite scene. It was a bit silly, that bit.
Yeah, it's just another example of them trying to drag out for the full 2 hours rather than just going in for the kill.
Yeah, definitely. So, you know, this is still carrying on from the cable car scene. So we see Bond and Dr. Goodhead slide down the cable using chains. So I like that bit. and then we see Jaws is chasing them down in a cable car, which I thought was quite funny. And then Bond and Dr. Goodhead drop down and survive, whereas Jaws crashes at the bottom. And then you see like people running away, and there's like, all rubble and everything, and that bits of smoke and dust. But this is sets it up for a nice little love at first sight, Andy. So we see Dolly for the first time. I thought that was quite nice. They're smitten straight away, weren't they, those two? And then we see Bond and Dr. Goodhead on the, I don't know, you see like the mountain side, like the hill, get picked up by some henchmen disguised as, ambulance people and paramedics. And I think, Andy, this is the first time we've had a fight in an ambulance, if I recall correctly.
I think you're right. It's the first time I remember any ambulance involvement.
Yeah.
In any of the Bonds. Yeah.
Yeah, and we also have another sped up. But I think this one, it doesn't add anything to action, but I think it's a bit funny because we get the sped up bit where the trolley and the henchmen fall out of the ambulance, and then the trolley basically goes down, and then the trolley and the henchman goes flying into this billboards, and there's like I can't remember if it's a male or female, but there's like a model, isn't there, on the billboard, and it lands in the mouth. So I thought that was a bit funny.
Yeah, I'm assuming some sort of like dental billboard. I can't remember exactly what the slogan was, but it was something along those lines. So it's at this point that Goodhead is kind of taken away in the ambulance by the henchman, and Bond is left to it, I believe. But the very next scene, for no real reason that I could gather, we see Bond in full Western gear, riding a horse, whilst the theme from the Magnificent Seven plays. And I was watching that, and I was thinking to myself, have I like accidentally pressed fast forward or next scene or something, because it just didn't compute as to why that would be the very next scene after what we've just seen on the film. It's very, very strange. And then we go to this kind of like another secret base of sorts for MI6, and he opens the door to a room, and there's monks in there doing kind of a sparring session or a practice fight session. Just I'm not really sure what to say about this. It just seems so out of place and so random.
I agree. It is very random about the monks bit. But yeah, in terms of where you open the door. But also, Andy, what you said about the Western gear and the music. Maybe the producers, they've gone from spy. They're just like throwing in load of different genres just to kind of capitalize on the market. So, we've got the spy film, we've got a sci-fi film. I know, let's throw in a scene for anyone that likes Westerns as well. And then we've obviously got romance as well. So, the romantic genre. So I think they're just a scattergun approach there. But, another little comment here, Andy, is we see Moneypenny, Q and M on location again. So as you know from previous podcast episodes, we've mentioned that a number of different people from MI6 have been on location, and I like that. They get out. They're not just always stuck in London at MI6. But also, Andy, I don't think it's surprising at all. Bond seems to know, and he demonstrates his knowledge of plant life. He likes to kind of show off, doesn't he, to M in various things.
Any chance he gets, he likes to break out the encyclopedic facts, doesn't he?
I know, in those days, Wikipedia wasn't out, but can you just imagine, like, Daniel Craig's version is just trailing through Wikipedia just in his downtime, just absorbing all this knowledge. And do you reckon he's editing as well when he comes across things like about various gin or alcoholic drinks or plant life or other bits that we've seen in the, that we've pointed out in the other podcasts? He's just like commenting on and editing.
Well, I think in that kind of universe where Wikipedia exists and James Bond is on his plane having a look at things whilst he's going from location to location, I wonder if he finds his own Wikipedia page and edits that. Because, we know he's famous from previous films where his death was reported on the front page of the newspaper. So he's got to have a Wikipedia page. in modern times. So I wonder if he's sat there on the plane just kind of exaggerating his stats and maybe lowering his age, and he's actually 6'4", not 6'2", things like that.
I bet, yeah, and he's adding all the Bond girls from his little black book, just keeping tally. But no, that's a good observation there, Andy. So we then cut to the rainforest. So Bond is on his speedboat. So he's being chased and attacked with various mortars and machine guns. So I think Roger Moore has been in more speedboat chases than any other Bond actor, definitely so far. Because when you think about chases with Roger Moore, it's definitely boat chases. I think is what I think of. In terms of different actors, he's definitely got a few boat chases under his belt, hasn't he? In this franchise.
Yeah, he's definitely the boat Bond, whereas the others are more car Bonds, you could say.
Yeah, and Moore does like a ski chase as well. So boats and ski chases. But the last comment from me is the very obvious. There's dummies being used in this boat chase as well.
Yeah, they clearly didn't spend their budget on special effects for this part of the film. That's for sure. One thing to note as well is that the bad guys are all seen in yellow uniforms. And if we recall from The Spy Who Loved Me, everyone was in a red uniform. So is this a conscious decision just to let the audience know who's who? So you've got kind of red team versus blue team, or yellow team versus green team, or whatever it may be. Whether that's because it's confusing otherwise, or whether they just think the audience is maybe a little bit thick and they need reminding. But it's certainly very interesting anyway that they're all in very, very obvious uniform colours, so you can detect who's on the good side and who's not.
Do you think villains have a catalogue and they're just basically looking for, when they're ordering like guns, and they just have like a henchman uniform, and he's looking through and goes, "Oh, I can't have that because Goldfinger's henchmen have green or something," and then they're just trying to make themselves distinct. It just seems a bit funny how they're always in a distinct colour or a uniform, or you can easily tell them apart, can't you?
Yeah, I wonder if they have like a home and away kit depending on who they're feuding with at the time. So if it's like Spectre versus Goldfinger's men, or Drax versus Baron Samedi, they've got to get their kits arranged accordingly, haven't they?
Yeah, it's interesting. I will have to. I'm trying to think. In later films, I don't think it's really noticeable. It's it's been years. I'm just I'm sure we can cover it in future episodes. I'm just trying to think. Daniel Craig films, have we come across stuff like that?
Something to look out for. I mean, there's got to be some element of uniform if military type forces are involved, or security forces. So maybe it's not as unusual as we think it is, but at the moment it just seems too obvious, if anything, I would say. Almost like it's, they're dumbing down for the audience. Another point on this scene, so we see that Bond escapes using a hang glider when he's getting close to the waterfall, and Jaws is after him and he goes over the waterfall. And he's absolutely fine. So all the things that have been done to Jaws so far in this film, he's got more lives than a cat, is the comment that was in the notes, and this is definitely proving to be the case so far.
Yeah, he's very robust, isn't he, Jaws? Also, the wife remarked here that only Bond could find a group of beautiful women in the middle of a rainforest, and I think that's true. I think that was a good observation by her there.
Yeah, it's certainly convenient that it would be Bond would be the one to find them. It's at this point he follows a blonde lady to an underground lair, which is another classic Bond villain move, to have an underground lair. The blonde in question here was also seen in Venice, so this is a bit of a callback. And this was the part of the film that made it go from a 2 to a 3, and that she's briefly out of her top for the briefest of seconds. Yes, it's childish for me to say such things, but we've got an audience that like to know about these kind of things. So there's a nip slip which gets an extra point for the film. Otherwise, you're talking 2 out of 10.
I miss this, Andy, and obviously we've done the nip slip nipple watch before, which you've pointed out a few times, but I've missed this one, Andy. So
It's going to get us kicked off the air, I'm sure, because it's not very PC. But I'm a child.
No. My mind is in the gutter too. So we get Bond as a fight with, I think it's a python, isn't it? After being knocked into the pool. And then we see basically Jaws just lifts Bond out by his head. So obviously Bond, Jaws is falling down the waterfall, managed to get back to the secret lair in the middle of the rainforest as well, and lifts Bond out. I had a thought here though, Andy. Do we ever see Bond reuse gadgets across different movies? Because obviously in this film, we've seen Bond use his wrist dart gun a few times throughout the film. But I was trying to think when this happened that, in a film, there's gadgets that are really useful. And does he ever reuse the same gadget? Because we've seen things like the safe cracking device, but we've seen it in films where one time it was small and then another time it was just like really big, wasn't it? Do you remember the one where it was hinched through the window by the crane?
Oh, yeah,
and he set it up, and then in another film it was just like a small, yeah. Do you recall any gadgets being used through different films?
So the one that immediately comes to mind is the Aston Martin DB5, which was first seen in Goldfinger, I believe. It's got obviously the machine gun headlights and the rocket launchers and the ejector seat, etc. And we see that in the Daniel Craig films. I think first time we see that is in Skyfall. So that's kind of the obvious one that comes to mind, but I'm not sure if there are others with any of the other Bond films. But that's the one that I remember straight away.
That's a good memory there, Andy. But if any listeners recall or can answer that question, feel free to post on our socials.
Yes, indeed. So the next location is space. Of course it is. We see Bond and Goodhead. They escape via a vent. This is in like the space station, isn't it? Or I'm trying to think where it's in space. It's not the darkness of space. It's within. It must be in the satellite or space station of some sort. But there's loads of people around where they escape from this vent. They emerge into hundreds of people, and they're wearing ridiculously noisy shoes. Every footstep can be heard quite loudly. But no one in the room notices them. No one hears them. No one sees them. So that's very, very fortunate on their behalf. A little bit later on, we see Bond and Goodhead. They get onto Moonraker 6, and it's obviously zero gravity. And we see Goodhead with a clipboard, and she's writing something on the clipboard. And my question is, why is she doing paperwork? Like, why is she doing paperwork in zero gravity? That's just bonkers anyway. But why is she doing paperwork at all? It's not her space shuttle. She doesn't work for Drax, but yet she's courteous enough to fill in their paperwork. I don't understand what this was about at all.
No, and I must admit I missed this bit, Andy. So I don't know if she was just trying to fit in or what in this bit, but maybe she was just playing the part. I don't recall, if I'm honest, in terms of what she was writing on the clipboard. But she's obviously just, I'm guessing she's just trying to fit in. James Bond has got all this experience of, well, actually, she's a spy, isn't she? We find out that she is an
CIA. Yeah, she should know better.
She should, yeah. That's a valid point. So we find out that the space station city, whatever you want to call it, is invisible for radar. So that's why no one on Earth has picked up that Drax is this space station. I thought this was funny. So everyone's on board now on the space station, and Drax kind of does this, I don't know how you call it, like a welcome speech, but everything, like all the lights are dimmed and it's all, then the spotlights are on him. So he's on stage. And then as soon as he finishes, all the lights are back on now. So everything returns to normal. He's told everyone his plan as well. I just felt that he had serious delusions of grandeur there. So, he's saying, "Oh, look at me, everyone. I brought you all to this space station. I'm kind of like king of the castle." And then that's it. All the lights are off and everyone's kind of getting back to normal. Also, another observation here, Andy, I noticed was all the women are wearing short skirts, whereas the males are wearing trousers.
That sounds like a Bond move rather than a Bond villain move. That's the sort of thing he would do. What we do get, speaking of Bond, is we've got some more action in zero gravity. So Bond and Goodhead are in a part of the space city where zero gravity is present, and they're just walking. So this is really a comment around the actors Roger Moore and Lois Chiles. They're just walking and pretending to flop a bit. I thought this was really poor acting. Really, really poor. They lose points for things like this because this just really takes you out of the moment. You can forgive them for things like continuity errors because they don't necessarily have control over that, but their acting here is really, really bad.
I think for that budget, they probably could have afforded to go into the earlier bits. I'm not sure what you call it. You go so far up and you get that low gravity part.
Yeah, they could have gone into like the zero gravity chambers or even flown into space with that amount of budget. But anyway, very, very poor. So you lose marks there, Moore and Giles. We get Bond confronting Jaws, and he punches him in the mouth. And he's done this before. We're in The Spy Who Loved Me. He punches him in the mouth, which is a bad idea because Jaws has a metal mouth and it hurts to punch him in the mouth. But he's clearly not learned this lesson, and he does it anyway. But the thing that really struck me about this is that Bond aims a swift kick to Jaws between the legs, and there is a huge thud sound, which sounds metallic. Now, we know he's got metallic teeth, but does he have a metallic as well?
I don't know, Andy. I missed that, to be honest. That was well picked up with the FUD. I wonder, you should have asked him, when you met Richard Keel in...
I did meet Richard Keel.
And you should have asked him.
But I didn't ask him about his... And I regret that to this day.
No, you could have got a photo there. But no, I wonder if it was a joke to a little nod to the audience about that.
It's not something I want to research either, to be honest. We'll keep it as an open question. But if anyone does know the answer, feel free to share with us. I'm just not going to search it out myself. But it's at this point, or not long thereafter, that Jaws turns over to the good side. Bond is in conversation with Drax, and a comment's made around only selecting the perfect specimens. And of course, Jaws being 7 foot plus and having metal mouth and potentially metal maybe doesn't fit that mold. So Jaws start to realize that actually maybe I've chosen the wrong team here.
Yeah, because he looks, doesn't he, at Dolly as well, where Bond is like talking to Drax about this perfect specimens, and the clogs are slowly working, aren't they, in Jaws' head, thinking it all through. But we then see Bond press the emergency stop button, and then everything comes to a halt, and then we get another funny sped up scene again, which I mentioned earlier about, is this the first time we see it in Moore's film? And then we've had it a few times already. In Moonraker. Then we see the space fight between Drax's army and NASA, and then this is where the wife said that there's a shot of the exterior where NASA's flying up, and then they start getting out, and then the Drax's army are coming out the space city. She makes a comment, because they're all wearing yellow, they look like little minions fighting in space. But then we see that they're all using laser guns as well. And it's strange because Q was demonstrating, or one of the people in Q's team was demonstrating the laser gun, wasn't he, earlier in the scene? So my question was, it seems strange because then that technology is widely available. And then why, if it's so widely available, we don't see it in future James Bond films? We only see it in the sci-fi version of Bond.
Yeah, and if it is widely available, why does Q feel the need to test it as what seems to be a prototype? Unless he's mass produced it at a real rate of knots, then the only explanation could be that he's way behind the times, and MI6 are behind in the technology race. Doesn't make sense. We see the wrist dot gun again, and Bond uses it to shoot Drax and send him out of the airlock. This particular gun has been used. We've talked about it quite a lot throughout this podcast. So it's obviously used throughout the movie. It's not just where it's the normal case of it's used once or twice and then never seen or heard from again. This is his go-to move that he uses again and again and again. And we get Jaws. There's carnage ensuing. Things are blowing up, and Jaws is looking for Dolly, and they embrace. And it's at this point he says his only line of dialogue in the entire Bond franchise. So across both films, he only gets the one line, and it's at this point he uses it.
Yeah, nice little ending, I think, for Jaws. And we don't ever find out, do we? Whatever happened to him, I don't think it's ever mentioned in future Bond films.
No, we don't know, but I'm guessing he dies happy.
Oh, is that what you took out of it? Do you think he died on the space station with it all kind of blowing up and everything? Or
I think
no, because I think
I
was going to say, I thought there was a comment to say that they got on a shuttle or not, or like an escape pod. Or am I imagining that? Yeah, I thought Goodhead said something. Well, I don't know if I'm imagining that now. We're gonna have to rewatch it.
You might have a point there. I think I'm going through the notes I made, and I'd pretty much given up by this point. It was just the whole thing was pissing me off, so I was just kind of waiting for it to be over. But you might be right. But either way, him and Dolly, they've had a good time, and if she's into metal phalluses, she's in for a really good time, that's for sure. Final scene of the film. Let's get this over and done with. Bond and Goodhead, they're making their way back to Earth, and it's being streamed to the Queen and to the White House because this is a big moment. They've saved the world yet again. And the cameras start, and we can see that Bond and Goodhead are in zero gravity, and they're not wearing a great deal, and they're wrapped in a towel. And it's at this point Q makes some comment about Bond attempting re-entry. It's the only way a Bond film can end, is it really? Him and the main squeeze, and Bond doing what Bond does best.
Yes, I think it's a funny little ending there, a good humorous ending, and then that's it. So that's the movie. So now let's carry on in terms of going through some of our usual features. So next section is our one-liners and quotes. So I won't be doing any accents or acting. I'm just going to be boring, Andy, and read it. I know you're after that movie deal, so feel free to do it. The first quote, Andy, is the end quote. So this is between Sir Frederick Grey and Q, and Sir Frederick Grey goes, "My God, what's Bond doing?" And then Q goes, "I think he's attempting re-entry, sir." And then the other one that I've got, Andy, is between Dr. Goodhead and Bond. So Dr. Holly Goodhead says, "You know him?" And then James Bond goes, "Not socially. His name's Jaws. He kills people."
Yeah, that's quite a memorable line, yet not one of his better ones. There's no real quip there from Bond, so it was a bit of a strange one. But some more Goodhead and Bond dialogue. Goodhead says to Bond, "Have you broken something?" To which Bond replies, "Only my tailor's heart." At this point she kisses him, and Bond says, "What was that for?" She says, "For saving my life." To which Bond replies, "Well, remind me to do it more often." And finally, as alluded to towards the end of the film, Jaws has his one and only line of dialogue. So him and Dolly have found some champagne. They're on the space station. Things are blown up around them. So he pours out the champagne and says, "Well, here's to us."
Yeah, I like that little. Yeah, hopefully he wasn't paid on dialogue. So he would have got paid, what's that, four words? So yeah, when I think of that, I just think of the first Terminator film, with Arnold Schwarzenegger barely having any lines of dialogue and getting them quite a big pay packet. So
it's quite a good word to dollar ratio, isn't it?
It is, yeah. God, if I could get work like that, I'd be Loving it. So our next feature is the book versus movie. So I've got a couple here. So I think it's a bit misleading, this, Andy. Well, I think that Bond in the book, Bond never visits space in the book, whereas obviously in the film, more goes where no Bond has been before, space. And also, Jaws doesn't feature in the novel.
So, and also in the novel, Bond travels to Blades, which is M's club, to investigate Hugo Drax, whom M suspects of cheating at cards. And interestingly, the Blades Club is featured in a future Bond movie, Die Another Day. So that's one to look out for on future episodes. Now, Jay, should we lighten the mood a little bit? Do you want to hear a joke?
I always want to hear one of your jokes, Andy.
Right, here we go. This one's a banger. So few people know this, but James Bond once had a partner, Agent 014, but he was exposed as a double agent.
I think that's a good one, Andy.
And what's really good about that one is not only is it hilariously funny, also educational. We've got some basic maths in there.
It is, yes. It is.
You're always learning.
Always learning on this podcast, yes. We bring lots of facts, don't we? So, Andy, the big one now. This is the quiz. Oh, let me get my quiz ready now. So, as always, we have 4 statements, Andy, and 2 of those statements are correct and 2 of them are incorrect. So, Andy, I have to hold my hands up here and say that I forgot about this feature originally, and I had to rush and make up 2 statements and then research 2. So apologies there, listeners. It is not as high quality as my previous questions. So apologies. I just wanted to put it out there just in case you got them both easily. And then, I'm just shamed. But yeah. So
you've got your excuses in there.
My excuse in straight away. So the first statement, okay. Jaws was originally going to return to the franchise to complete the Jaws trilogy, air quotes. However, Jaws doesn't make any more appearances because he was busy filming the Cannonball film series. Statement B. The producers were dubious about whether the audience would accept the height difference between Jaws and Dolly. However, they would go ahead with this as Richard Keel's wife in real life is the same height as Dolly. Next statement. The scene where the gondola converts into a hovercraft and goes onto land took 5 attempts to film. The first 4 attempts all ended up with Roger Moore falling into the water. And the last statement, the wrist dart gun malfunctioned in one scene when Moore accidentally shot a stuntman during their scene together. So, Andy, that's the 4 statements. Would you like me to repeat any of them?
No, I think I've got these. This is a tricky one. You've done to say this. You pulled this last minute. This is pretty tricky. I'm going to rule out statement 4, the malfunctioning dart gun shooting a stuntman. That feels very Alec Baldwin to me. So I'm gonna rule that one out as it just seems a little bit too fresh in the memory. So I'm going to say that one's false.
Okay.
I've not seen the Cannonball Run trilogy. Is it Cannonball Run films? So
I believe there's 3 of them. Yes.
Yeah.
And Roger Moore appears in at least one of them.
So I'm torn with that one. I'm going to say though that statement is also false. And I'm going to say that the true statements are around the height difference, with Richard Keel's real wife being the same height as Dolly. And I'm going to also say that the gondola hovercraft scene taking 5 attempts to film is also true. So I've gone false, true, true, false.
And Andy, you are true on each count. So well done, Andy. A pat on the back. a virtual pat on the back. I'm
At
giving
this
you a
point,
virtual
we'll insert a sound effect with like rapturous applause, fireworks, cheering, crying from adoring fans.
Yes, just so to kind of expand on the cannibal bit, he does appear in Cannibal 1, 2. I don't know if he appears in number 1, but number 2 was filmed in the mid to early 80s. So it wasn't a timing thing, because obviously, as you mentioned earlier, this was released in 79. And then you were right. Yes. So Richard Kill's wife was the same height as Dolly. And apparently, Roger Moore, he fell in 4 times and had to replace his clothes on each time. And when he did it the 5th time, they were on the last silk tie that he had. And he manages to land it on the last attempt. So well done, Roger Moore. So that's the quiz all done. We're on to another great feature now, the rankings review. And I know I say this probably every week, Andy, but my mind is like a sieve. And it's one of the things I do like about this podcast, because, you know, as listeners as well, we can kind of keep track of the bits that we're looking after. So I'm just going to kick us off and cover the first 3 bits that we're monitoring. So runtime, obviously, you know, Andy, you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast that the 2 hours 6 minutes seems consistent with the Moore films, and it is. So that's the 3rd longest Bond film so far, just behind Thunderball at 2 hours 10, and On Her Majesty's Secret Service at 2 hours 22 minutes. So I can't remember if we said this before, but George Lazenby has obviously done 1 film, and it's the longest so far. So he's definitely got his value there, isn't he, in terms of run times?
Yeah, I'm just looking at the run times now, and what's interesting is if you look at the 4 Roger Moore films we've had so far, all within 5 minutes of each other in terms of total runtime. So the shortest film is only 5 minutes shorter than the longest film so far. So very, very consistent.
Yeah, and because I think we mentioned this before in one of the very first early podcast, the DVDs that we're watching is a special box set, and they don't come with many features. You know, in like modern films, you kind of have some extras saying like cutscenes and bits like that. I wonder how much in a Bond film they actually take out. Is this the formula they've got with Roger Moore that is going to pretty much land in between, the 5-10 minutes that you've just said there, and it's a formula that they've got, or it's just like they've done filming and they've had extras and they just cut out, I don't know, say 5 or 10 minutes, and it's just by coincidence that they all landed in at that time.
That's something to monitor as we go through the series, just to see if there is any deviation in future Moore films.
Yeah, so next one I'm going to do is the kill count. So mentioned earlier on at the podcast, James Bond only kills 12, which, according to my daughter, is a lot. However, it's actually the 4th highest so far of the Bond franchise. So it's behind The Spy Who Loved Me at 31, You Only Live Twice at 21, Thunderball at 20, and then Moonraker at 12. So interestingly, at the moment, because we're keeping count of the kills by actor as well, so Roger Moore has 4 movies under his belt, and he's got 52 kills so far. That's an average of 13 kills per movie, which is 1 more so far than Sean Connery's average of 12. So even though, Andy, I've said before, Roger Moore's version is a more smooth and loving, he is having the higher kill count in terms of averages so far. And the last one before I pass over to you, Andy, is the martini watch. And he does have a martini in this one, and Manuela prepares one for him. And that's where, you mentioned earlier on where she's in his room already and she's made a martini for him. So yes, he does drink one in Moonraker.
Yeah, it's interesting that he's back on what works, the traditional drink. Speaking of traditional, the greeting of James Bond, we hear this in the movie at 17 minutes 22 seconds. So all 4 of Roger Moore films so far have featured the introduction. This is the second shortest of his reign in terms of how long it's taken him to get there. But what's interesting is all 4 of the introductions from Roger Moore have all been later than all of Sean Connery's introductions. So Sean Connery likes to get that line in quite early, whereas Roger Moore tends to leave it quite late. But in this case, it's the 3rd longest time overall. Moving on, we've got the hats. We have yes to hat wearing and yes to hat throwing, and this is the first time hats appear in the Roger Moore films. So he's back with the headwear. Gondola for the win, I see, is the comment that we've written here.
I love a gondola. I wonder if Bond appears on another gondola in the future.
I think he might, but I can't remember which film. So we'll get to that later on in the season, that's for sure. Another thing we're looking out for is Felix Leiter. It's a bit of a barren spell. He's not appeared for quite a while now. So yet again, no Felix Leiter in this film. So we've gone 3 in a row with no appearance. Will he appear again in future? Spoiler alert, yes he will. But when? I guess we'll have to find out soon enough. And final one from me before I hand back to you is the box office. So Moonraker took a total of $210.3 million. So in terms of actual box office, it's the highest so far. But we're also interested in what that adjusts to for today's dollar value. So if all the Bond films were released today, of the ones we've seen so far, this was actually ranked 6th out of the 11 so far. The adjusted box office figure would be a little over $814 million, which puts it in 6th place. Highly profitable, highly successful. And in terms of actual box office, an absolute smash hit, and still a smash hit when you adjust it for inflation. So very positive numbers there.
Brilliant. Thank you, Andy. So the one that lots of people will be eager to know, Andy, is the Bond girls. This list is getting bigger and bigger. So I'm going to basically, I think, Andy, the best way to do this for me is talk about where the 4 Bond girls land on my list. And I'm going to do it from top to bottom this week, because sometimes I start from the bottom. This week I'm feeling different. So I'm going to go with Dr. Holly Goodhead in at number 9 for Moonraker. So straight in at number 9, and that is just above Sylvia Trench and just below Domino from Thunderball. Now, there is a big gap, Andy, because I don't think the quality of the Bond girls was great in Moonraker in terms of how do you interact with Bond and, how much screen time they get as well, etc. So down from, so we've got number 9. I'm going all the way down now into 31st and 32nd. So we've got Corinne Dufour in at number 31 and Manuela in at 32. And then, Andy, I've got to be honest, at the very bottom, just below Marie from Diamonds Are Forever, I've gone for the generic private jet hostess in at 43 is my list. How different is yours, or is yours quite consistent?
So this is part where we tend to veer off in different directions at times, but I think we've been relatively similar with our picks here. So you've got Holly in at 9. I've got her in at number 12 overall, just between Fiona Volpe and Plenty O'Toole. But still a respectable position in at number 12. A decent Bond girl, you'd have to say. And like you, I've also got a big gap between Holly and the rest. So from there, we're moving all the way down to number 27 for Corinne Dufour, just above Tilly Masterson. And I think I've mentioned this on previous podcasts, that Tilly Masterson is something of a benchmark in terms of where I look for some of the lesser featured Bond girls. And she Corinne in this case comes in just above Tilly, takes the number 27 slot. Manuela, I've also got in at 32, so very consistent with your thinking, but obviously there's a 5-place difference between her and Corinne as opposed to consecutively. And lastly, the private jet hostess, I've got her in at second to bottom, so 42 out of the 43 we've seen so far. Saida from The Man with the Golden Gun remains in bottom spot, but like you, I didn't feel like the private jet hostess really added much to the film, so comes in at a lowly 42. Let's move on to the theme song. So we mentioned this is the theme Moonraker by Shirley Bassey, making her third appearance on the list. Shall I start with this one, Jay? I was disappointed, I've got to be honest. So Shirley Bassey has been consistently high on the rankings with her efforts of Goldfinger and Diamonds Are Forever, but in this case I just felt like the song didn't work as well as the others. So I've got this in at number 9 out of the 11 so far. So I've only got On Her Majesty's Secret Service theme and The Man with the Golden Gun below. Not Shirley's best effort, and you can understand why she was reluctant to play it live at future shows, because it's not one of her favourites. Where do you rate this one?
I agree, yeah, in terms of it's not a best work out of the 3. And when you look at my list, I've got Shirley Bassey at the moment in number 1 and 2, Diamonds Are Forever and Goldfinger. So for me, Shirley Bassey's leading the way. It's not as good. It's nowhere near as good as the number 1 or 2. But for me, it is better than some of the other songs on the list. So I've put her in as a respectable number 6 in my list. So that is just under You Only Live Twice by Nancy Sinatra, and just above the On Her Majesty's Secret Service, the John Barry theme as well. Because the songs I've got at the bottom, so from What Shall We Love, Matt Monro, Lulu, The Man with the Golden Gun, James Bond theme from Monty Norman and John Barry and Dr. No, and Nobody Does It Better. I'm not keen on those. Whereas the Moonraker one, I could happily listen to, when on the podcast that you pull together for the Spotify playlist that you pull together for the podcast. I don't mind listening to the Moonraker one, whereas some of those other songs, I'm not really keen on it. But I agree, the stuff that we said earlier on the podcast in terms of how late she actually got the song, in terms of doing we're not doing well in the charts, not doing any kind of promotion, not singing it really in terms of any of her shows. I think it's clear as well that it's not her favourite, is it, in terms of what she's done. So we've got a difference, haven't we, in terms of where we've ranked them?
Yeah, slightly different musical tastes starting to become apparent here. I wonder if this will continue with future themes.
Yes, and we're being very disciplined, and just for the listeners, me and Andy, outside of the podcast, we're not talking about future films, we're not doing any spoilers. But I must admit, Andy, I'm really intrigued to see what you think of the later songs. So I'm deliberately not asking you questions because I don't want to know until we get to the podcast. But I love to know the later theme songs in terms of, the Brosnan movies and the Craigs. I'd love to get your opinion when we get to those episodes, because I'm really intrigued to see where you rank those compared to where I rank those. I do, because I tend to think, in terms of, air quotes, that the classics for Bond themes, I think is, earlier on in the series is what I would judge it. So moving on now to the opening credits. And Andy, I've got to be really honest here with you and the listeners. I'm struggling with these because the opening themes, the opening credits are very similar in lots of aspects in terms of naked models, silhouettes. There's only certain bits now that I think distinguish between the opening credits. And, I'm not going to go through the whole list. You can look at the website and you can see a whole list, and, obviously listen to previous podcasts so you can see where we've ranked them. So Moonraker, putting at number 7. And if I'm being honest, it's ranked that high because, well, it's middle table really. It's that high for me because we got Roger Moore in it. You know, I've scored it quite high because we've had Roger Moore in The Spy Who Loved Me. We got Roger Moore in Moonraker, and I'm liking that we see James Bond in this opening credits. I'm liking that. So it has gone in at a respectable number 7. But I said it's very hard now to distinguish certain bits from different films from, you know, the opening credits. How about you, Andy?
So you make a fair point with it being hard to distinguish. I think that's gone into my thinking in some regards. And if we go back to the Man with the Golden Gun episode, I think one of the things I said about it was that it was quite lazy. It was quite repetitive. There was nothing new. And that's exactly how I felt about the Moonraker credits. There was just nothing intriguing or interesting or nothing we haven't seen before, other than, you know, the background shots are different. It's earth and space as opposed to gold and diamonds or volcanoes. It's the same old, and for that reason I've put it in dead last. Just, it did nothing for me. And you know, maybe I'm being harsh with my judgment of it, and if I was to look at it as a standalone piece, I might appreciate it more. But you know, we're 11 films in now, and it's just feeling really lazy and repetitive. So for that reason, it's gone bottom of the pile.
And I don't know, that's surprising or not surprising, considering, you know, the ranking that you gave the movie. One of the things that I do, Andy, because obviously we watch the movies and we're watching them like a week apart, but I sometimes, you know, because of, like I said before, like how I rank them in terms of thinking like where they are in you know, relation to like the previous film. So start from the top and do I think. So what I do is I look on YouTube at intro sequences. So, you know, like if I think, I try to remind myself what, say, You Only Live Twice intro sequence was like, because obviously we've got our notes and, you know, we've got these on the website as well. But then, you know, I kind of watch them back to back because on YouTube, there's quite a lot of videos there where you could just watch all the intro sequences if you want. So I find it is a good way to kind of gauge where you are. But like we both said, it's very samey, and I'm just because I can't remember much of the intro sequences for future films as well. I'm just wondering if this is just going to be the same now throughout the remaining films of Moore. And I can't remember what the Timothy Dalton intro sequences were like. So I'm intrigued to see if they change much for future actors, you know, once we get into, you know, like the 90s and noughties and, you know, the Craig films as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think it'd be interesting to know if there's a change simply because of a change in actor, or whether there is a change kind of midway through an actor's reign. So, you know, will the next one be completely different from all the other Moores? I guess we will find out soon enough. But let's move on now to the Bond villains. In this film, we've got Hugo Drax, we've got Jaws, and we've got Chang, and we're now up to 29 total. So, like the Bond girls list, this is becoming more and more difficult to judge and differentiate. I'm going to start with top of the pile from the 3 villains in Moonraker, and that for me was Hugo Drax, but quite a disappointing villain. I've got him at 17 out of 29, so just below Rosa Klebb, just above T.H. Johnson. I think the quality of the villains in the last few films has been a little bit lackluster, and Hugo Drax just didn't really do it for me as a villain. So that's why I've got him in at 17. Now, a couple of places below is where I've got Jaws in at 19. Now, if you recall from last week, I was waxing lyrical over Jaws, and I had him in my top 3 overall, just behind Goldfinger and Oddjob. I think Jaws in The Spy Who Loved Me, tremendous villain. Really, really powerful, really engaging, just a real strong point of that film. But for me in this film, it felt almost like a parody. I think partly because of the amount of times he was in situations where clearly he should have died and then survived seemingly unscathed. And then at the end of the film, turns to the good side, which, you know, is something of a feel-good story in and of itself. But I think it was really disappointing to see how much he changed from film to film. So that's why I've got him in at 19. And then finally, of the three, I've got Chang. Chang I've put in at number 24 out of 29. So just below Blofeld from Thunderball and just above Bambi and Thumper from Diamonds Are Forever. Chang was, again, another one of these bit part characters that didn't really add much to the film. So, you know, there was no real redeeming features that could have ranked him any higher for me. What's your view on the villains from this film?
Yeah, it's interesting, Andy, because listening to what you're saying about Jaws, so I've got a question. Do you think they should have only kept him in the one film, The Spy Who Loved Me? Or are you glad he returned? And I don't know if you say not his legacy has been damaged or kind of impacted, but obviously, you know, you've put Jaws in The Spy Who Loved Me at number 3 and now in Moonraker in number 19. Would you have preferred it was a one film henchman only?
I think I would in some ways. And I think the one thing that I don't think we've spoken about and I don't think was addressed in the film is why Jaws works for Drax. So obviously he worked for Stromberg, or in conjunction with Stromberg, and now he works in conjunction with Jax for no real reason that was ever explained. So it feels like they enjoyed the characters from the last film and decided to shoehorn it into this film. Kind of like, in a strange way, kind of like J.W. Pepper was shoehorned into a second Bond film after his appearance in a different one. Just, it felt out of place and a bit unnecessary.
Because there is that scene where Drax is talking to someone on the phone and he says something like, oh, if he's available, yes. And obviously they're talking about Jaws, because then you see Jaws later on, don't you? But obviously, yeah, it just seems Jaws is just a hired villain, isn't he? Henchman. He's got no loyalty to anyone, or he's not there for the cause, is he?
No, he's not so much anti-Bond as he is pro-villain. But yeah, just doesn't really fit for me.
Yeah, so yeah, just a question I had before I kind of moved on to mine, because I had a similar view, but for me, again, I agree. The villains, henchmen, are definitely weaker. Well, actually, I'd say the villains are definitely weaker in the more films compared to earlier on, because we both obviously scored Jaws at number 4 and number 3 in The Spy Who Loved Me, which is obviously a more film. But when you look at the main villains for the more films, they're very middle table, aren't they? In terms of the other ones that we've seen in the Connery, or even if you go George Lazenby film with On Her Majesty's Secret Service. So on that note, I've gone with Jaws at number 11 and Hugo Drax at number 13. But I could have easily put them the other way around, you know. They were disappointing for exactly the reasons you said about Jaws. And Hugo Drax, I think he was better than Scaramanga and Stromberg. So I do think he was. Just looking at my list, actually, I've put him as the highest main villain for the more films, haven't I? But again, when you look at, so in terms of my list, I've got Hugo Drax at number 13, Dr. Kananga, Mr. Big at 14, Scaramanga at 15, Stromberg at number 16. So it's all middle table in my list, Andy, for Roger Moore. Just to finish off on my list, Chang is at number 22. And again, he has a good fight with Moore before he falls through the glass of the clock tower. But I think he does just enough for me to finish above Sandor, you know, Milton Reed in The Spy Who Loved Me. So next up, we're tracking obviously the movies, and we've both said at the beginning what, you know, the scoring that we gave. But in terms of the other movies, so I've given Moonraker 5 out of 10. And obviously, we've said in previous episodes, we're not having any joint positions. So we've got Diamonds Are Forever. Well, I've got Diamonds Are Forever, 5 out of 10, and the Man with the Golden Gun, 5 out of 10. I've put Moonraker smack in the middle, Andy, with 5 out of 10. So Moonraker comes in at number 10 out of the 11 films so far. So for me, it's not the worst Moore film. That honor goes to The Man with the Golden Gun, but it was only just above it. You know, I had to do a bit of thinking there. And for me, Man with a Golden Gun, the villain scored lower in terms of Scaramanga. Moore did only 1 kill. So that was in terms of, you know, what's kind of swung it. And we do get Jaws in this film, even though it's not the best version of Jaws. He's better than Knick Knack. So yeah, he you know, Moonraker did go in at number 10. Where is your ranking, Andy? I bet it's very surprising where your ranking will be for our listeners from what you said earlier.
This is a real cliffhanger, because I bet people are wondering where exactly it's going to fit. So interestingly, going into this week, Diamonds Are Forever and The Man with the Golden Gun were my 2 lowest ranked films at 5 out of 10 also. So we were quite consistent in that regard. But this film was just not good. It was not good at all. So the 3 out of 10 makes it slam dunk bottom of the pile so far. It's going to take some work to get it off the bottom of the pile, that's for sure. I don't need to say any more about it. It's just a really poor movie all round in my mind. But obviously, we don't just rank them overall, we rank them by actor as well. So again, there's going to be no surprise in terms of where it features. So obviously, with the score of 3 out of 10, Moonraker is going to come bottom of the pile for the Roger Moore films so far. What's interesting for me is that gives it a total score for Moore so far of 23 out of 40. So I'm averaging 5.8 for the Moore films, which matches your average score, interestingly, 5.8, 23 out of 40 overall. So do you want to just confirm where Moonraker sits in terms of your Moore rankings?
Yeah, so, you know, it's 3rd out of the 4 films so far, like I mentioned, just above Man with a Golden Gun, even though they scored the same. And Andy, yeah, I noticed that as well, that it's very weird that we both gave 23 out of 40 and the average is 5.8 for Moore. So we're both singing from the same hymn sheet, but we do have a slight discrepancy in terms of the individual films. But yeah, I thought it was quite a coincidence that we've both got 23 out of 40 and 5.8 out of 10. This last bit, you know, before we finished, and it pretty much stays the same. And this is the Bond actors that are ranked as we see them in each film. So, you know, for me, Sean Connery is still number 1. Roger Moore is at number 2, and Jules Lazenby at number 3. I think I said it last week, Andy. I can't see this list changing until we move on to another actor. I can't imagine your list changing after this solid entry by Moonraker. But do you want to confirm that?
So I've kept the list the same as well. Connery, Moore, Lazenby is the order. But this is the film that made me really question whether I was correct or not. I have to say, I don't think it's all down to Moore. I don't think he was necessarily all bad in this. I spoke about 1 or 2 of his acting flubs earlier in the podcast. So, you know, it wasn't the best performance by Moore, but not enough to knock him off the 2nd spot so far. But I will stay true to the fact that if he messes up or if he goes downhill, I'll have no problem in knocking him down to spot number 3. Similarly, if he pulls it out of the bag and the next few films are, you know, incredible performances, I'll have no problem moving him up to number 1. But at the moment, he stays a comfortable number 2 behind Connery, and I'd say he's more likely to drop down than he is to go up the rankings over the next few films.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, Andy, because obviously we are judging them per movie, But I think Jules Lazenby, we obviously, I gave On Her Majesty's Secret Service 8 out of 10, and you gave it a solid 7 out of 10. So, when we look at the individual film ratings, the 8 out of 10 is actually higher scoring than any of the Moore films so far for me. And the 7 out of 10 that you gave On Her Majesty's Secret Service is the joint second highest. So on paper, you could argue, especially for me, why isn't George Lazenby higher? But for me, it's so hard judging someone on only one film compared to someone that has done 4 films so far. And even though Moonraker is the weakest one for you and the joint weakest for me, but obviously we're not having joint ones, so the second weakest, it's hard to have him lower than George Lazenby based on one film. So I don't know if that's obviously going against George Lazenby on our rankings. But if you said on paper that Roger Moore only did one film and George Lazenby only did one film, then I'd probably say we might have had a different ranking.
Yeah, I think you're right to an extent, but I also think there's partially the difference between a good Bond film and a good Bond actor. And I think Lazenby was in a good Bond film, whereas Roger Moore is a good Bond actor in what was a very poor Bond film this time round. So there's more to the scoring of the film than just this performance, but obviously it would change if the question was how would you rank each Bond actor's films, then Lazenby's coming out on top based on his score average that we have for him so far. But I think when you look at their individual performances as Bond, I'm comfortable that we're doing the right thing. Yeah, a bad Bond actor does not necessarily mean a bad Bond film.
Yes, no, that's a valid point, and I agree. And I think that might be the same for future films as well, for certain actors. So yeah, that's the Bond actors done now. So that is our last feature in terms of the rankings and ratings, Andy.
Okay, let's wrap this thing up then, shall we? So next week, if you want to listen to our podcast, The Rating Room, you could say that it's for your ears only. And that's because next week's film is for your eyes only.
Well, that's this week's episode done. We hope you enjoyed it.
Special thanks to the band Sugar Tongue for the theme tune to The Rating Room. You can find them on all the usual social media channels. And be sure to check out their song The System, available now on Spotify.
You can find and message us on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram by searching The Rating Room.
You'll find all our social media links on our website, theratingroom.com, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Or feel free to drop us an email at theratingroom@gmail.com. Goodbye, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week, right here on The Rating Room.
The Rating Room. The Rating Room. The Rating Room.